Shalom. First and foremost, call Halal Yamla, Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem HaRachak Wadash. Double honors to the apostles, the bishops, and the elders of Great Millstone, from whom I learned the truth from. And also peace and salutation to the hopeful elect of the nation of Israel, scattered throughout the four corners of the earth. And the title of this video is going to be, The Lord created Israel to be above all nations, not equal to them. Alright? Because as we see, as of this past week, or these past couple of weeks, you got certain Israelite camps pretty much turning coat in Zadadays and switching up. Alright, switching up the doctrine when it comes to, who can receive salvation. Alright, Israelite camps now switching up and teaching that the actual heathen nations can be saved and receive salvation. Esau, Edom, and the heathen nations can now receive salvation and be blessed with us, Israel, in the kingdom of heaven. Alright, ruling with us. And ultimately, they either sold out, or that, as the scripture speaks about in Jeremiah, trimming their ways to seek love. But ultimately, overall, whatever the case may be for these camps that's switching up nowadays, alright, as we're at the end, as we're closer than ever to the return of Yahushua, whatever the case may be for these particular camps, switching up their doctrine in these other days, and now teaching that the actual heathen, alright, Esau and the heathen nations can be saved and receive salvation. Ultimately, they're all off, and Yahweh Shema Shah is going to deal with them, because that's a damnable heresy, alright, especially, because if you're teaching that the actual heathen nations can receive salvation and be saved, then ultimately you're ultimately what? You're teaching that you're gonna have Edomites beamed up into the chariot, and not just Edomites, but heathen nations, actual heathen nations being beamed up into the chariots, to be crowned by Yahweh personally, receive new bodies and be entered into the new covenant, alright, and rule under Yahweh with the Israelites in the kingdom of heaven. If you're teaching that actual heathen can be saved and receive salvation, and those are all damnable heresies. No, the new bodies as spoken of all throughout the scriptures is only for Israelites, starting with us, the hopeful elect. And the new covenant, obviously, when you read in Jeremiah 31, as well as Hebrews the 8th chapter, is only for the nation of Israel, Judah and Israel, all 12 tribes, starting with the elect. No heathen nations will have part in the new bodies or the new covenant. And ultimately, as I want to pretty much go into this lesson, simple lesson, alright, ultimately, Yahweh Shema Shai created his people, the nation of Israel, alright, starting with us, the hopeful elect, the remnant, to be above all nations and never to be equal with the heathen nations. See that? And that's always been a problem with our nation, even going all the way back to the time of the sons of God, alright, the descendants of Adam through Seth in Genesis the 6th chapter, who pretty much fell from their estate as rulers over the earth, a righteous nation of people walking the earth to pretty much, teach and lead humanity in righteousness. Jake, ultimately started mingling with the heathen nations, started mingling with the seed line of Cain, who acted as the wicked nation of people on the earth before the flood. And ultimately what? It caused a great fall amongst the sons of God, as you read in Genesis the 6th chapter. And ultimately it all led to the Lord having to bring forth judgment in the form of the flood. Alright? And pretty much literally, as you read throughout the volume of the book, that same mistake has always bit our nation, the nation of Israel, in the ass. Mingling with the heathen nations, alright, lowering themselves from a position of rulership or position of sovereignty to mingle with the heathen nations, learn their works, bow to their idols, right? and ultimately is always caused us to fail as a nation, going to various captivities. Okay, the Lord kicking us out of the Holy Land, stripping away sovereignty and rulership from our people. All right, and has got us all the way to where we are today. Okay, here in captivity in Babylon the Great, all 12 tribes, and wherever else. All right, Israel scattered out throughout the four corners of the earth. All right, but ultimately, despite all the different falls that our nation has had going all the way back since the beginning, okay, the Lord has always intended to have us ultimately above all the heathen nations. Okay, this is Deuteronomy 7 verse 6. I'm gonna start right here. Okay, oldie but goodie, as brothers like to say. Deuteronomy 7 verse 6. All right, this is the Lord speaking to the children of Israel through Moses. It says, "For thou art an holy people unto the Lord Yahweh thy power. The Lord Yahweh thy power hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself, above all people that are upon the face of the earth." See that? So the Lord ultimately intended for his people, the nation of Israel, to be above all people, all right, all nations that are upon the face of the earth. All right, let's get another one. Deuteronomy 26. Deuteronomy 26 and verse 15, it says, "Look down from thy holy habitation from heaven, and bless thy people Israel, and the land which thou hast given us, as thou swearest unto our fathers, a land that floweth with milk and honey." All right. So this is talking about the nation of Israel, right? Now I'm gonna jump down to verse 18. Deuteronomy 26 verse 18. "And the Lord Yahweh hath avouched thee this day to be his peculiar people, as he hath promised thee." Okay, what does the word peculiar mean? All right, because that's written several times all throughout the scriptures in reference to the nation of Israel, that Israel will be a peculiar people to the Lord. This word peculiar is Strong's H 5459, says Sagala, and it means possession, property, valued property, peculiar treasure. Okay, treasure. All right. So Israel's the Lord's treasure. Okay, Israel's the Lord's possession or property. Okay, because what? Israel is the wife of Yahweh Shemashah. And the scripture speaks about it in the book of Sirach, in the Apocrypha. There's a scripture that speaks about how, okay, when a man gets a wife, he that getteth the wife beginneth a possession. Okay, whereas, when Yahweh Shemashah established Israel to be his wife, so to speak, right, by making the first covenant with us, and the promises and all these things. Okay, the Lord ultimately made us his possession. Okay, so we as a nation of Israel, starting with us, the hopeful elect, we're literally the wife, okay, the bride, the possession of Yahweh Shemashah. All right. So Deuteronomy 26 and verse 18, it says, "And the Lord Yahweh hath avouched thee this day to be his peculiar people, as he hath promised thee, and that thou shouldest keep all his commandments." Verse 19, "And to make thee high above all nations, which he hath made." All right, to make thee high above all nations. So not only does Yahweh Shemashah intend to make the nation of Israel, his people, above all nations once again, okay, but high above all nations. Not just simply above all nations, but high up above all nations. Literally levels, okay, light years above these heathens, so to speak, right? to make us gods on the earth again. You see, it says, Deuteronomy 26:19 again, and to make thee high above all nations, which he hath made in praise and in name and in honor, and that thou mayest be an holy people unto the Lord Yahweh thy power, as he hath spoken. See that? So the Lord intends for the nation of Israel, his chosen people, his peculiar treasure, okay, to be high above all these nations in praise, in name, all right, which we know the word name in Hebrew, Shem, goes into fame, reputation, glory, all right, rank, authority, memorial, monument, all right, and as well in honor, okay. So the Lord ultimately created his people for, okay, to be the nation of people, to be praised in the earth, to be honored in the earth, okay, ultimately through his begotten son, Yahweh Shai, okay. And let's also get this as well. Now let's go to Deuteronomy 28 and verse 1. Okay, going into the blessings and the cursings, right? Now, Deuteronomy 28 and verse 1, which goes into the blessings, it says, and it shall come to pass, if thou shalt hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord Yahweh thy power, to observe and to do all his commandments, which I command thee this day, that the Lord Yahweh thy power will set thee on high above all nations of the earth. Okay, now of course, back in ancient times, our forefathers ultimately broke the law and broke that first covenant, and therefore the Lord brought the curses upon our people, in which we're still under the curses to this very day. All right, scattered in captivity, subject to fines and payments. Okay, the heathen nations have got up high over us, and we've been brought down low. Right. Well, here we see, as we look at the blessings right here. Okay, ultimately the Lord, okay, as the remnant are waking up in his outer days, the elect, us the hopeful elect, and we're hearkening to the voice of Yahweh Shai via hearkening to his men, his prophets, his apostles, starting with the apostles and the bishops and the elders of Great Millstone, down to the least of us that are of the hopeful elect, as well as the men who labor before them, going back to Abba Bivens. All right, as the elect are waking up in his outer days, all right, hearkening diligently to the voice of the Lord through his prophets, right, and observing and doing his commandments to the best of our abilities, right, and ultimately not going to bow the knee to this beast system or his image or take his charagma and be faithful unto death. And the Lord is going to set his people, starting with the elect, back above, high above all nations on the earth once again, okay, and enter us into the blessings, okay, which ultimately, the blessings, as we as a nation could have fulfilled the blessings from verse 1 to verse 14 in this chapter back in ancient times, because we kept constantly breaking the law and going off and breaking that first covenant. But ultimately, when will we as Israelites ultimately fulfill the blessings spoken of in verses 1 to 14 in Deuteronomy 28? Okay, that's going to come, all right, when Jacob, our forefather Jacob, enters into his blessing, spoken of in Genesis 27. All right, Genesis 27 and verse 28. This is going into the blessing that was given to our forefather Jacob, okay, the patriarch father of the 12 tribes of Israel, right? It says, Genesis 27 verse 28, therefore Yahweh will give thee of the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth and plenty of corn and wine. So just as Esau is ruling over the earth right now in his latter days with the fatness of the earth, where our forefather Jacob was also blessed to receive the fatness of the earth, rulership over the whole entire earth. It says, verse 29, let people serve thee and nations bow down to thee. Be Lord over thy brethren and let thy mother's son bow down to thee. Okay, and who is, of course, who is the brethren of our forefather Jacob? Okay, Esau, Edom. Okay, it says, "Cursed be everyone that curseth thee, and blessed be he that blesseth thee." All right, and so what does this entail right here? That when Jacob, okay, the Israelites finally enter into our blessing, is going to include what? All right, not only having rulership over the fatness of the earth and complete dominion and control over the four corners of the earth, and controlling the resources and the trade of the earth, but also our blessing is going to include, as it's just read in verse 29, the nations are going to serve us, bow down to us. Okay, we're going to be Lord over our brethren Esau, Edom. Okay, and Esau is going to bow to us, which ultimately entails what? That the heathen nations are going to serve slavery under us in the kingdom. Okay, the heathen will not receive salvation and receive new bodies and be brought into the new covenant and rule with us in the kingdom of heaven. No. Okay, when we as Israelites, all right, Jacob, finally enter into our blessing, the heathen are going to serve us, okay, and bow to us. All right, and ultimately, when is Jacob, the Israelites, going to enter into this blessing that we're reading of right here in the kingdom of heaven? Okay, because as it speaks of in 2 Ezra 6 and verse 9, it tells you what? That Esau is the end of the world, meaning what? Esau, Edom, the biblical Edomites, which is the so-called white man, will be the nation of people that will be ruling in the earth, the whole entire earth, in these latter days before the second coming of Yahushua, the Messiah. All right, and then what? Jacob is the beginning of it that followeth, meaning what? After Esau's world is taken down via the return of Yahushua and the holy angels, okay, Jacob's world is going to be set up, which is what? The kingdom of heaven. Okay, the kingdom of heaven. That's going to be Jacob's world. That's when Jacob, the Israelites, are going to enter into this blessing that we're reading of right here in Genesis 27, verses 28 to 29. Okay, and in the kingdom of heaven, under Jacob's blessing, that's when we're going to fulfill the blessings in Deuteronomy 28, verses 1 to 14. Okay, Deuteronomy 28, verse 1 again, it says, "And it shall come to pass, if thou shalt hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord Yahweh thy power, to observe and to do all his commandments, which I command thee this day, that the Lord Yahweh thy power will set thee on high above all nations of the earth." Okay, to where the nations are going to serve us, bow down to us, including Esau, Edom, the tabernacles of Esau, Edom. Okay, that's all included with the blessing that was given to our forefather Jacob, and that's all included with the blessings here in Deuteronomy 28. Okay, we're going to fulfill this in the kingdom of heaven. All right, no heathen will be joint heirs with our rulership or with Yahushua's rulership. Okay, and receive the new bodies and be entered into the new covenant. All right, no heathen will be joint heirs with our blessing, because right now, just as we as Israelites aren't joint heirs with Esau, Edom, as he's in his blessing, all right, the rulership over the fatness of the earth via the sword. Okay, just as we as Israelites aren't joint heirs with Esau's blessing in the world right now, well, guess what? When we enter into our blessing, Esau, Edom, nor any of these heathen nations will be joint heirs with our blessing. You see? Because ultimately, okay, the kingdom of heaven, the blessing that was given to our forefather Jacob, that we read in Genesis 27, okay, that's going to fulfill the tabernacle of David being reestablished in the earth once again. Okay, because when we go to the prophecy, as we always bring out in Amos, the 9th chapter, all right, the restoration of Israel. Amos chapter 9 and verse 8, it says, "In that day will I raise up the tabernacle of David that is fallen, and close up the breaches thereof, and I will raise up his ruins, and I will build it as in the days of old." Okay, And the rebuilding of the tabernacle of David, okay, is the elect amongst all the 12 tribes raising up, okay, especially here in these latter days, as Judah and Israel, or Judah and Ephraim, okay, northern and southern kingdom, have been reunited in these latter days here in Babylon the Great America, okay, and synonymously here in America, Babylon the Great is where the great awakening of the Israelites in these latter days has begun. Going back to the late 60s with our forefather Albert Bivens, okay, preaching Yahushua during his time, and that led to what? The beginning of the great awakening of the remnant / elect of the nation of Israel, okay, and that ultimately, brought made pretty much made Amos 9:11 come to pass in these latter days. All right, the rebuilding of the tabernacle of David, okay, the rebuilding of the elect among all 12 tribes raising up in these latter days. And as it said again, the latter part of Amos 9 verse 11, the Lord said he's going to rebuild the tabernacle of David, okay, the house of David, the throne of David, as in the days of old. Now, when you go into the scriptures, all right, and you read about the tabernacle of David as in the days of old, back in the ancient times, all right, when you go to 2 Samuel, the 8th chapter, all right, David's triumphs, it pretty much goes into an abridged history of how David and his men, his governing body, pretty much dealt with and smote the heathen nations back in ancient times. Okay, they smote the Philistines and subdued them. They smote the Moabites and subdued them. Made the Moabites their servants. Okay, they smote the Syrians and set up garrisons in Syria and made the Syrians our servants, our slaves. Right? All the way down to Edom. We smote the Edomites and set up garrisons in the land of Edom, and the Edomites became our servants. Okay, and as it says in verse 15 in this chapter, 2 Samuel 8 and verse 15, and David reigned over all Israel, all right, over all 12 tribes, and David executed judgment and justice unto all his people. So the throne of David, the tabernacle of David, in the days of old, was rooted in, okay, executing righteous judgment and justice, not only amongst our people, but ultimately all throughout, the known world at that time, okay, over all the heathen nations. So the fact that Yahweh Shai, according to prophecy, according to what we just read in Amos 9 verse 11, is going to raise up the tabernacle of David as in the days of old, okay, as it was in the ancient times, as we're reading of right here in 2 Samuel 8, all right. Ultimately, what does that mean for the heathen nations? That means they're going to be subdued once again. They're going to be smitten again with the rod of iron, okay. They're going to be broken like vessels, okay. And the garrisons are coming back. You see, we're going to rule over the heathen nations once again in the kingdom of heaven, all right. And we're going to subdue them. We're going to force them to bow unto us, okay, including the Edomites, the tabernacles of Edom, all right. And we're going to rule over the heathen nations with the rod of iron, via the tabernacle of David being raised up as in the days of old, okay. And as we also always bring out, okay, the tabernacle of David, or the throne of David, is associated with the kingdom of heaven, okay. Isaiah 9 verse 6, it says, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, speaking of Yahushua, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. All right. And as a matter of fact, even when you look up this word government, which is Masharah, okay, Strong's H4951, Masharah means rule, dominion, government. And then when you go down to the Strong's definition, it says what? Empire. See that? Empire. Okay, so the throne of David, which is going to be the governing body ruling in the kingdom of heaven directly under Yahweh Shai, is literally going to be an empire on earth. All right, the kingdom of heaven is literally going to be an eternal empire set up on the earth, okay, to rule everlasting. All right, because even as it speaks of, real quick, when you go to Daniel chapter 2, when Nebuchadnezzar received the vision of the statue, the head of gold, all right, the arms of silver, the legs of brass, okay, and then the feet of iron, mixed iron and clay, right, which all represents what? The different empires that were ruled throughout secular history, okay, after the death of King Solomon, starting with the Assyrian Babylonian Empire, all the way down to the Roman Empire, as well as the revival of Rome, which is fulfilled in what? America, NATO, and the EU, okay, right? All these are empires, okay, different empires that ruled throughout secular history. And so at the end of this this statue, this vision, at the end of these empires rulership being fulfilled up to these latter days, okay, it says Daniel chapter 2 and verse 44, it says, and in the days of these kings, all right, these kingdoms, these empires, all right, towards the latter days, it says, shall the power of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, which is what? The kingdom of heaven. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. You see that? So the kingdom of heaven, as I just said, is not going to be left to other people. Meaning what? The kingdom of heaven is not going to be for the heathen nations to be ruling with us, okay, under Yahweh Shai. But instead what? They're going to be broken in pieces and consumed. Meaning what? We're going to subdue the heathen nations. All right. They're going to be forced to bow to us. We're going to force them to keep the laws and the commandments. We're going to rule over them with a rod of iron. Right. And they're going to serve slavery in captivity under us. Okay. They're not going to be joint heirs with our rulership. Okay. Nor receive the new bodies, nor be entered into the new covenant. Okay, point blank, period. And so when we go back to Isaiah 9 and 6 again, it says, for unto us a child is born, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, talking about Yahweh Shai again. It says, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, all right, the empire, as we read in that word government, Masharah, it went into empire. It says, and his name, or his title, his titles, right, shall be called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty Power, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. These are all titles that Yahweh Shai is going to go by in the kingdom, right? It says, verse 7, of the increase of his government / empire, right, and peace shall there be no end upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice from henceforth even forever. Hey, and guess what? Did we not read in 2 Samuel 8 and around about the 17th verse that King David's throne was rooted in judgment and justice? Well, guess what? Yahweh Shai's kingdom, which is the throne of David, is going to be reestablished with judgment and justice throughout the four corners of the earth. Okay, from henceforth even forever. The zeal of the Lord Yahweh of hosts will perform this. See that? So the kingdom of heaven is associated with the throne of David being reestablished on earth. Okay, the tabernacle of David. All right, which is ultimately going to be what? The 144,000, 12,000 elect men amongst the nation of Israel. Okay, led by the 12 apostles, to serve as the governing body in the kingdom of heaven under Yahweh Shai, all right, breaking in pieces and consuming these heathen nations, making these heathen bow to us, including the tabernacles of Esau, Edom, these heathen serving us and serving slavery under us. All right, us ruling over the heathen with a rod of iron. Okay, and being above all these nations on the earth once again, forever and ever. All right. This is all the plans that Yahweh Shemashah has for his people once again, starting with us, the hopeful elect, to set us above all nations once again, via the tabernacle of David, or the throne of David being reestablished on the earth once again. Okay, this time forever under Yahweh Shah. All right. Because mind you, Jake, whether it be, Jake that's in the world that don't know that they're Israelites, or even Jakes that know that they're Israelites in these wayward camps, okay, for you to teach a doctrine that the heathen can make it and the heathen can receive salvation, okay, you're basically pushing a doctrine for the heathen to be equal with you, okay, and that's always been one of the main problems amongst our people, going all the way back to the beginning. Always want to be equal with the heathen and wanting the heathen to be equal with them. Okay, Jake is afraid of a rulership mentality. Okay, Jake is afraid of taking on the mindset that he's created to be above the heathen nations around the bottom. All right, because to believe, we as Israelites, to believe that we're above the heathen nations, according to the scriptures as we're going into. Okay, that's ultimately a winner's mentality, right? Because if life itself was a team sport, right? If reality itself was a team sport, and all these different nations throughout the earth, including our nation, were all different teams, right? Well, when you watch different team sports on TV, whether it be football, basketball, baseball, soccer, ice hockey, right? What team enters into a game or a contest looking to be equal with their opponent, or looking to play down to the last minute for a tie? Okay, to be tied with their opponent, whoever they're playing against. Okay, no one. All right, any team that enters into a game or a contest or a sport, all right, their main goal is to win, to be better than their opponent, to be better than whoever they're playing up against. Okay, to be above their opponent and ultimately win. You see that? So guess what? That's the mindset that Yahweh Shemashah, through the Holy Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh, has instilled within the mindset of his elect. Okay, to know and understand that we're a team. Okay, the perfect team, right? The hopeful elect, the remnant, and that ultimately we were made to win. We were made to be above all these different teams throughout the earth, which is what? The heathen nations, starting with the tabernacles of Esau, Edom. We were made to to outmatch our opponents, right? To better our opponents, and to ultimately get the victory and win at the end of the sport, right? And so if you're an Israelite in these latter days that's woken up to the fact that you're an Israelite, but you're switching up and teaching a doctrine that the heathen nations can make it and be saved and receive salvation, then you're ultimately of the mindset of playing for a tie. Okay, you're not walking around with the winner's mentality. Your ministry is not rooted in the winner's mentality, because when you tie, okay, when you tie, ultimately you're not winning. Okay, you either aiming, to tie with your opponent, or you're ultimately aiming to lose, and that's what's going to happen to these wayward camps in these latter days. Okay, especially these camps that's trying to save the heathen nations, right? Trying to teach that the heathen can make it. All right, ultimately you're not going to receive a tie when it's all said and done. No, you're going to receive the L, the loss. Okay, because that's not what the Lord Yahweh Shemashah created our nation for. He didn't create our nation to tie and be equal with the heathen. No, he created us to win and be above these nations, to get the victory over them. Okay, to be the honorable people on the earth, worthy of praise, under His begotten Son Yahweh Shai. You see that? And we, the hopeful elect of the nation of Israel, we're the only ones amongst our people in these outer days that's being developed more and more into a rulership mentality, a kingship mentality, a winner's mentality, right? Okay, striving lawfully, of course, right? But nonetheless, a winner's mentality, you see? And that's ultimately what the Lord has prepared for His people, mainly us, the hopeful elect, to win and get the victory in these outer days over, all the madness and the pseudoscience and the technology that these heathen are trying to set up in these outer days. Because here it is, you jakes out there in these wayward camps, all right, that know that you're Israelites, all right, you're trying to save these heathen and trying to make them equal with you. But meanwhile, when you look at what these heathen got going on in these outer days, they're trying to do anything but try to save you. Okay, they're doing everything in their power to keep you separated from your power, Yahweh Shema Shai, destroy the Lord's creation, recreate creation in their left hand wicked images through pseudoscience, technology, AI, and ultimately the MOTB, right? So these heathen are trying to do anything but save you, Jakes, in these outer days. But yet all Jake wants to do is try to save the heathen. Okay? These heathen don't need salvation. They need to be stopped. All right? They need to be these heathen need to be stopped. They don't need salvation. Okay? They need a rod of iron over their head via the kingdom of heaven. All right? And that's what's coming. Okay? So let me get one more. This is Exodus chapter 19 and verse 5. It says, "Now therefore, if ye will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people." So here we see that narrative again. Above all people, above the heathen nations, for all the earth is mine. Verse 6, "And ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests, and an holy nation. These are the words with which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel." See that? So the Lord ultimately intends for His people, the children of Israel, starting with us, the hopeful elect, the 1/3, the remnant, to be a kingdom of priests, okay, to rule as kings and priests on the earth, okay, this time under Yahweh Shai, pursuant to was that Revelation 5 verse 9, roughly paraphrasing it, okay, where it talks about how Yahweh Shai has redeemed us throughout the four corners of the earth to rule as kings and priests on the earth under Him, all right, and that which ultimately that's going to be fulfilled in the kingdom of heaven, right? Well, as we see, that concept of the Israelites ruling as kings and priests, all right, on the earth, okay, goes back to right here in the law, okay, a kingdom of priests and holy nation, all right. And we couldn't fulfill this under the first covenant, so now this is ultimately going to be fulfilled when we're entered into the second covenant, the new covenant under Yahweh Shai, all right. And as through ruling as kings and priests, a kingdom of priests, a holy nation, that's what's going to put us back above, all right, above all people, above all nations of the earth once again, as the Lord's peculiar treasure. You see that? So, hey, Lord willing, this video was edifying. And until next time, shalom.